Why not?
Yes. Kia ora, welcome everyone. We're delighted to host you this afternoon in honor of Mental Health Awareness Week, even though officially it's already been gone. But because we had the last Monday off, we hosted this one today. Thank you very much for joining us and making the time. We are very pleased to have Tipene Pickett with us today. For him, it's the middle of the night because he's zooming in from Poland. But I am very confident that you will have a very useful session. Tipene, over to you.
Kia ora. Well, nō reira, ka nui te atu ki o koutou. Nau maharo mai, whakatau mai ki tēnei wā zui. Ora waingia e koutou te aho rongo tēnei wā. So welcome, folks. You feel settled and have that cloak of peace over you at the moment. And I'm just going to start us off with a karakia. And then for those of you who know this waiata, it's probably the first one that I ever learned, tū tera mai, join in. We'll see how much synchronicity we can get with as many people as we've got. Well, nō reira, māku te karakia. Tēnei te ararangi nui tuake nei, tēnei te ara o papatūnuku e tākoto nei. Tēnei te ararangi rao ka papu e tākoto nei ki rarau o ngā tapuai o tānei ki raro. Tēnei te pōnau mai te ao karangatea te ao e piri. Karangatea e tāne e piri e tata whakamaua ki a tīna. Tīna humi e hui e tā ki e. All right, folks, on whā. Tahi, rua, toru, whā. Tūtera mai ngā iwi. Tātou patu e. Tūtera mai iwi. Tātou patu e. Whai te maramatanga. Me te aroha engari. Kia ko tapata. Kia ko tahira. Tātou tātou e. Puri te aki That's pretty good. Wow. I'm impressed. He manu te uri koutou. So folks, I'll give a little bit about me. And really, I'm not going to sort of talk too much. I've got a little bit of background around sort of Purakau and how I got interested in this. And I've got an exercise for us using one of these Purakau. So, no heo ki te tātoku whā, ngā ngara te hiki te maunga, waihua te awa. Ka hangune te iwi, kura heka kawa te hapu, waihua te marae. Ki te tātoku matua, no te whenua tia mana ea, ko Ngāti Pākehā tōna iwi, ko Tipene Pickett tukunga. So my mum is from a little place called Waihua in Kahungunu country on the east coast. It's a little bit south of Wairoa, for those of you who sort of know the MHAW Peninsula in that area. And my dad's from Germany. So have sort of the mix of different worldviews contained within me. And I suppose my journey into remembering who I am as Māori started maybe sort of 20 years ago with my mum finding out amongst all the grand uncles and aunties where our whakapapa lay. So she went down there and they all burst into tears as a of the whānau that had returned. And then she took me down, and for me that just got me hugely interested in my identity as Māori. So a huge part of what today comes from is because of the passion that I had for getting to know who I am, really. So let me just, so that journey took me to working at a place called Te Atia Marino, which is sort of a district health board, kaupapa Māori alcohol and drug service and mental health. And there I was in the presence of a number of tohunga and kaumātua who passed on a lot of knowledge. And at one point, I took a journey down to Gisborne, and I got to sit in the presence of Mark Kopua, a sort of Purakauologist, and he's a carver from Te Aitonga Hawati. And he and his wife, Dr. Diane Kopua, have a company called MHAW, and the idea is to indigenize the space. They're there to use our traditional ways of being, our traditional ways of encoding knowledge in a therapeutic space. So I got the opportunity to learn some Purakau and have utilised that in my work in addictions and mental health, both with Māori and non-Māori, to great effect. So I just wanted to give an acknowledgement to Mark and where this Purakau comes from. This Purakau might look different in different areas. It's not the Purakau, it's a Purakau. And maybe a little bit of, I thought I'd give a bit of a kōrero first about what Purakau means from what Mark was giving a kōrero about. So, you know, Māori, we transmitted our knowledge orally. We also carved our knowledge so into rākau. So his kōrero was, Pu can mean origin and sort of source, but it's also the name for sound. It was the name for the gun. And he said Pu is the name for when the sound made when they would be carving. And each rākau, each tree has a different sound. So as they were carving, so they would know different trees by the sound that they made during carving. And so his kōrero about Purakau was the sound of the story of the tree. And the idea being that we each have our own Purakau, and as each rākau has its own unique identity, so we have our own unique story. And I thought it was a really lovely way of putting Purakau. So maybe too, just a bit of a kōrero about one of the terms used in it particularly. So we hear this, MHAW Atua was the name of the company that Mark and I have. And Atua is often, yes, the word God is often associated with that word Atua. Really, that's sort of more of a colonized word rather than what Atua means. So I thought I'd give a bit of a kōrero about Atua. So Atua, go back, it's whakapapa. For Māori, this is whakapapa, and Atua were the children of Rangi and Papa. And I've put a little whakapapa there. Uru Te Ngāngana was the eldest, Uru Omoko was the youngest, and there was about, well, accounts vary, from 50 to 70 children. The third youngest in the whakapapa that he gave is Tāne. And here's a particular important part, because he connects the physical beings, which we are, to the vibrational realms that those atua belong in. So you could imagine for Māori, our way of coding knowledge and our way that we observed nature and that we observed in nature, we also had ways of coding knowledge to indicate different depths of meaning. And so Purakau was a way of coding knowledge. And the use of the word atua is the use of the idea of vibrations that go to, that are part of nature, is our way of being able to describe nature, describe the relationships between the different aspects that we saw in nature, but also the aspects that we saw in ourselves. So these atua, these elemental archetypal energies, were also manifested physically. And how that happened was through Tāne and the first Māori woman, Hene Ahuone. And when he collected the baskets of knowledge, the instructions were given to, and his desire was to create a physical being. So he asked all his brothers and sisters to give a gift, a taonga to Hene Ahuone. So each one of those atua gave a gift, and I've just put a few there. For example, Uru Te Ngāngana and Hene Rikoreko gave the pupils of the eyes so that we could process light. Tā Whirimātea and Hene o Mairangi, these are the atua of the winds. And so their domain, when physically translated into a body, was the lungs and the processing of their domain. Same with Tū Mā Tauenga and Hene Keira. theirs was the veins, so that we had the opportunity when that blood pumps to be able to stand and protect. And also, Tāwhiri Mate often had the association of being the god of war. Well, the way that I had it explained was, rather than see it as the god of war, rather the energy of instant action without thought, that energy that we have that goes to protect, that can help us access a lot of energy when it comes to change, but also particularly in the aspect of protection. So these, the idea of these atua is less taking away from the word gods and more seeing them as elemental energies. Balancing to mātauenga is rongo matane. Now he's the atua of peace and cultivated foods. So he was his gift was that sense we have of inner peace. And Tangaroa and Hine Moana, they were the atua, and the kaitiaki, the guardians for the oceans. And so they were responsible for their taonga of all the waters that we have, that carry the gifts of these other atua around our bodies, so that we get to exist in this physical realm. So this was our way of seeing how we came into being into this physical realm, and our way of coding that knowledge so that we could pass it on and keep the integrity of this knowledge. But I wanted to do this particularly because part of the principles of mahi atua, one was tēnei te pō no mai te ao, which was sort of from the darkness into the light, was to indigenize the space, was to sort of decolonize some of the words that have been associated with our atua. And the word God particularly was one that doesn't really give a representation to the depth of what atua are. So folks, that's just a bit of background, because I'm going to use that word atua a lot. Now, this Purakau that I have, and you'll just see a blank screen at the moment, this Purakau is called Te Noho Tatapu, and it's the whakapapa of tapu te noa. And we hear those words often now, and particularly in Te Ao Māori, you'll hear those words a lot, tapu te noa, and they have particular meanings. And so there's a number of different meanings for them. This particular Purakau gives a whakapapa for where these words originated. And this particular Purakau has been really useful in helping people that I've worked with in a process of change to be able to get to see themselves. It's sort of a bit like Māori psychology. It was our way of being able to not only link ourselves to the environment, but also to understand who we are and how these different aspects of ourselves relate to each other. So, and hopefully, folks, if you've got some pen and paper, because after this, I have a little exercise for you to do. And what I'd like you to do right now is to think about a change that's health related for you. Diet and exercise are usually pretty safe ones. Something that you're in two minds about, something you've got some good reasons not to do and good reasons to do. Or maybe it's something you've started doing and the commitment to that health change has wavered. And just to hold that change in your mind. And so I'm going to narrate this Purakau in the way that was sort of narrated to me by Mark. So this Purakau goes back to Ranginui and Papatuanaku. And these two, Mata o Te Ao, the parents of these children, had made a bond with each other, that they would be together forevermore. And that love was incredibly strong. And of course, when you have that sort of loving bond, children started to be born into this particular space. So after a long period of time, as more children were born into this space, it started to get cramped. It started to get until one day, one of the sort of middle siblings by the name of Kikeriwai, and kiri means to stir, folks, sort of pops his head up and just goes, I'm over this. I'm just too cramped here. It looks like some of my older brothers seem to have lots of space. I seem to have none. I'm just not happy with this. Something needs to change. And for the very first time in that space between Rangi and Papa, this vibration goes out that something needs to change. However, Kikeriwai, although sort of stirring things up and having the courage to initiate this kōrero that things needed to change, also wanted to check his own perspective out. So he turns to one of his brothers by the name of Toro I Waho. And Toro is to stretch, folks, and Waho is out. And he says, man, is it just me? Or is it really, really cramped in here? And Toro Waho says, it is, man. I'm with you. It seems really, I feel like I'm a bit squashed up too. And Toro Waho was a bit of a networker, so he started to also get this word out that something needed to change. And so in supporting Kikeriwai, this vibration starts to move through the children of Rangi and Papa, and was picked up by another one of these middle siblings by the name of Uipoto. And Uipoto pops his head up, and as he pops his head up, he sees this tiny little light way over in the distance, and it's a little pulsing light, and it's the only point of difference in all the darkness. And he gets really fascinated by this and very curious about what this light is, because it looks a little bit more attractive over there than what it is where he is. And so he turns to his brother Mamoru and says, can you see that little light way over in the distance? And Mamoru says, oh, I think that's called a hinatori. And so he sort of started to give this light some form by giving it a word. However, these two were also really fascinated by this hinatori, and decided they wanted to take a bit of a journey over there. So enlisted the one of the other siblings by the name of Pekitua, and sort of says, hey, look, can you see that light there too? And he says, I think that's the light of the glowworm, the moko huruhuru. So he gives a bit more form to what this light is, but they all are really focused on this little light, and it just seems much more attractive than the cold, cramped space that they are in. So these three decide they want to go on a journey towards the hinatori. And as they do, one of the older siblings by the name of Whiro, and Whiro was he's got a great relationship to fear and control. Whiro, he's often known as the atua of disease, but he's also really happy to sort of assert himself into a space and go, you can sit down, folks, I can take care of this. And he's really happy with how things are. And he's not sort of, this kōrero about things need to change is not something that he wants. And he says to Uipoto, if you take another step, I will curse you. And Uipoto, because he's so focused on this hinatori, pays no attention whatsoever to Whiro. And Whiro's not used to that, and so he's a bit annoyed about that. However, Whiro being Whiro, and decides he will take his attention to Mamoru. And before that, and because Uipoto is so focused on this light and paying no attention, Whiro curses him and gets goosebumps. And so the whakapapa of goosebumps comes from Uipoto. And, you get goosebumps, sometimes when you change temperatures, but also when you get those hairs that stand on the back of your neck and there's something's happening and you just know something of importance is happening, maybe in those wairua celestial realms. And so However, Uepoto continues towards this hinatori because he's so focused on this hinatori. So Whiro turns his attention to Mamoru, reaches out and grabs his hair and goes to pull him back. And as Mamoru is determined to get to this hinatori with his brothers, he has his hair pulled out. However, it doesn't stop him from moving towards this hinatori. And so despite the pain, he's got some really resilient character, old Mamoru, continues towards this light. And this is agitating Whiro no end. He's not used to having his younger siblings not do what he says, you know, being the tuakana and the older. So he decides, okay, let's have a look at Pekitua. So he takes his patu out and takes a big swing at Pekitua. And Peki means to jump. And Pekitua jumps out of the way, turns himself into a centipede, and does this in an instant. So he's very quick, and he's a bit cunning. It's like, well, you can't catch me now because I'm out of your sight. So he's quite a cheeky character as well. But these three still continue towards that hinatori. They're still making their way towards this point of light amongst the darkness. And this, of course, is infuriating Whiro. So he's deciding, well, it seems to be this hinatori is what's creating all this disturbance of the status quo because I don't want things to change. I'm happy with things as they are. So he starts to muse about how can I extinguish the light of this hinatori. And he's musing away there when one of the younger siblings, by the name of Tane, and Tane's he was sort of watching all of this unfold. And he's a bit of a problem solver. Tane's got that ability to sort of observe, not get caught up in things, but also come up with some out of the box solutions. He was a very creative sort of thinker and a bit of a team player, old Tane. So he was listening to his brother talking about putting out the light of this hinatori, and goes up to his brother and says, Whiro, I think there's only one way that you can extinguish the light of that hinatori, and that is to flood this place with light. And that argument, to flood this space with light, was the very first what do you call it? The very first impetus for what would eventually become the separation of Rangi and Papa, but that's in a different Purakau further on from here. But this argument that he had of flooding this place with light was the very first winning argument for what would eventually become the separation of Rangi Nui and Papa Tuanuku. So when talking about this Purakau, te noho tatapu or te tapu o ngā atua. Tapu was the state of constriction and confinement that these atua were in. And noa can mean belonging, but also, and sort of like where you're from, noa hekwe. So sort of origins and belonging. And according to Mark, kopua was an old kupu tawhito, an old word for light. Freedom from restriction belongs to the light or will come from the light. So this is the Purakau folks of Te Noho Tatapu and the whakapapa of Tapu Te Noa. So what I'd like you guys to do now is I have sort of a little exercise for you. And so I'm going to just move the screens. And if you've got a if you have a phone and you want to take a photo of these, because I'm going to put that previous screen back on so that you can, when you're answering the questions, you've got the atua to cue you. These are also in the chat. They're the very first what do you call it, very first thing put in the chat, and I think Nat might be able to put it again in the chat. And what I want you to do is think about that dilemma you're in two minds about. So this is a real play. This is something that is personal and means something to you. And I want you to answer 2 of the first 3 questions, and then question 4 and 5. And so if people have, I'll just give you yeah, there we go. I'll just give you a couple of secs to either take a photo of that, or you might want to go into the chat. And I will just go back to the screen. And I want you to take some time now, folks, just to, I'm just going to slightly end that show. You will see the Purakau there. It's just because I need access to other parts of the screen right now. So folks, you have 1.5 minutes for each question. And I'm just gonna play a little bit of music while you contemplate and write down your answers for that question, for those questions.
Kia whakata kotua ke rā I te takapau hora nui whakawhānau o te hanga puoro. Whakatangitangi o te ao tua whakarere. Nō reira whakapauroro a ke ngāre o puoro iere o te whai ao ki te ao tūroa. Ti he mauri ora. Te kune te pupuke te pupuke te hihere te hihere te mahara te mahara Te kore kore te po nui te poho te atu. Te pate.
How long have we got to go, Nat? A couple more minutes?
Kia pōkai a ke rai te takapau tūwhara o te pō. Kia whiti mai anō te rai. Whiti, whiti, whiti mai te rai.
A couple more minutes, folks. Give it one more minute, folks. Okay. So we've got a bit of a doodle poll, well, one of those polls for you guys. Because normally I would put you in pairs to sort of discuss this. However, I decided that we'd do this as an individual exercise. The questions that we'll put in the chat. And one is, how useful sort of have you found this personally in terms of framing a change, and maybe having some change in motivation towards that change. And I'm just curious to see what people's responses to that are.
They are completely anonymous.
Coolio. And it will vary from, it's really normal for there to be a range of responses. Looks like quite useful seems to be the most popular response. Awesome. So there certainly seems like the idea of using Purakau as a way of seeing oneself and accessing sort of strengths-based being able to identify strengths in oneself through the use of Purakau can be really useful. And my other specialty that I have a passion for is motivational interviewing. And so those last two questions are specifically from motivational interviewing. And why I've included those is because some years ago, I asked one of our kaumātua how he saw tikanga and our systems of healing from the Te Ao Māori perspective and motivational interviewing. And he knew nothing about motivational interviewing. But his answer was really profound. And he said to me, he said, well, tikanga has its own whakapapa and its own mana. I'm sure motivational interviewing has its own whakapapa and its own mana, and just allow each to sit in their own mana. And he gave that was a beautiful description of what partnership could look like, was to allow each body of knowledge to sit in their own mana. So folks, let's, and you've put the second one up there too now, Paul, which is how useful this might be in your work. And it looks like sort of similar. There's a number of you would find this would be quite useful in your work with people and maybe assisting them in a process of change. So folks, I'm really interested to maybe hear from some of you. Any questions that you might have, any aha moments that came, or any insights, surprises. You're all very quiet. Silence was the stern reply. Come on, folks.
Yes, feel free to unmute yourself or put a question in the chat if you like, or a comment in the chat. We'd be happy to read that out.
Kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora.
I just wanted to say that I liked the way that you described this as being very strengths-based, because when I did this exercise for myself, I liked the fact that I could see, you know, what I needed to draw on, but also where I could kind of be kind to myself, you know, when I kind of fell off the wagon a bit, you know, and needed to find a bit of resilience to keep me going. So I really like that aspect of it.
Wonderful. It is. So there is this, the idea of each of those atua sort of having strength, and it sounds like for you it's been like being able to see yourself in a story, in the Purakau. There's something gentle about that people seem to relate to. And actually when mahia atua work with people, they usually have two people work with whai ora, so they'll have somebody who's an artist and somebody who narrates the story. Now I know that in the setting that I worked in, having two people wasn't possible. So when I would deliver this with those that I worked with, I would narrate. I can't draw, but I made symbols up. So I used to do it on a whiteboard. So I would draw as I was telling the story. And so basically, I listened to this Purakau over and over again until I sort of felt like I had confidence in being able to narrate it. But it was really important to have a visual. And part of that goes back to that Purakau. Our language was oral, but it was also visual in our carvings. And I found the visual nature of working with these Purakau really helpful. In the same way that you did there, fine, and being able to see it, you can sort of identify it. So when COVID came and I couldn't be in person, I used this sort of animated PowerPoint, and you're really free to use this if you want to sort of listen to this Purakau and sort of feel like you want to make it your own. Any other comments, folks?
There's a comment in the chat from Janice who said it helped to identify the strengths I already have, but also identifying what was missing to help me move forward. That's beautiful.
Janice, you are able to say, unmute yourself and say a bit more. Was that you that just spoke?
Oh, kia ora. It's Janice here.
Kia ora, Janice.
Kia ora. Yeah, I have been. It was actually happened. This is so timely because it was something that I've been feeling really stuck with, and stuck in knowing, yes, I've got these strengths, and keeping looking to them and wondering why I haven't been able to move forward. And so, what this clarified for me was, it confirmed, yes, I have these strengths. But hey, there's some other things that are missing there that I need to be developing, and that's why I'm stuck. So it was really incredible, actually, very timely.
Oh, fantastic, Janice. Like it's so it expanded, it broadened your awareness. Like it sort of brought from the dark into the light.
Absolutely.
Aspects of yourself.
Yes.
Wonderful.
We've got another comment from Victoria, I think. It seems a much more positive and empowering way to look at it, reminding that we all have our own strengths, a place to start and grow from, like a fern.
Beautiful, Victoria, that sense of sort of unfolding and expanding and life growing. And it seems to, like from my experience of using these, it didn't matter. Like I worked with both Māori and non-Māori, and there was something about this Purakau, particularly this one, that seemed to speak no matter what the culture people belong to. And I guess there's something sort of universal in Purakau, and I know that there are similar stories from my Celtic ancestry, and they have their own Purakau. And so there's something really powerful in the psychology of seeing oneself outside oneself. It's sort of, I think Purakau externalize oneself and you get the opportunity to see it. And it's really helpful.
Yes.
How many atua are there? It's from, there are, oh gosh, there's, I've put in the, I'll send, you guys will get a copy of the PowerPoint too. The very last one has also got some references to some of the whakapapa of the atua. Some have 50, some have 70, some say they're over 100. What tended to happen too was a lot of the time it was only the male ones that tended to get, what's the word, tended to be named. And that was because of the way information was collected and put to, from Elsden Best, probably primarily, he really only just spoke about the male atua. And so there's a growing momentum now of identifying the female atua that were the counterparts to these male atua.
And Gail has raised a hand.
Oh, yeah. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Gail.
tēnā koe, Tipene. Tēnā pai tō kōrero. I'm really interested in the atua. I think you've partly answered it, because I was quite interested in the whakapapa of the atua, and if you've got a reference that I could research, because I can see this, I can see me using this quite a lot and thinking, whakaaro Māori, what would I do? I'm in a situation, or I've got to make a decision. I could relate to one of the atua, and I think that would help. And I've never come across this before, and I have to say it's a real eye-opener. But yeah, thank you. So I'm really just asking, he pātai ki a koe mo te papa, the reference mo te kaupapa, mo te na atua. Kia ora.
Kia ora gao ngā mihi. And so, and you're right, this is not a store. This is not a pūrākau that's really commonly known. You know, people know the separation of Ranginui and Papatūānuku, but they often don't know that there are many pūrākau that occurred along that process. And it's really nice to get to know some of the other atua that we don't really hear much about. We hear a lot about Tāne often, and Maui, and other ones in the sort of the school curriculum. But and folks, if I had any words of encouragement, would be to check out Mahi Atua. I'll just pop that in the chat too, because these guys, you know, they train people to be what they call mata ora. And mata ora is the facial tattoo, and it comes from a pūrākau about, I suppose it's our pūrākau of the healing from domestic violence. I guess would be from intimate partner violence would be a way, and it's a pūrākau of healing and the whakapapa of the moko. And so I'll just put it here, Mahia Atua, for those who want to go and explore further. And it's a mark and daikopua. And if you just pop that into Facebook or into Google, it'll all come up. And you can, I think you can actually, for a fee, you can download these pūrākau, because the ones that he has are not common. They're not ones that are in common circulation. But they're really helpful. And if you are non-Māori and you want to, maybe this really speaks to you and you think this would be really useful in your work, a way of using this, because the people that I worked with in Te Atea Marino weren't necessarily Māori, but they were also using pūrākau, was to just acknowledge the source of where it comes from. That it comes from Te Aitanga Hauiti, it's a pūrākau, it's not the pūrākau, and can be a sort of give a sense of safety that you're not treading, what's the word, because people can feel a bit reticent to, if you're not Māori, to use these, and yet they can be. Mark was really encouraging of anyone who is interested in using these in a way that was respectful to use these. But they certainly encourage people to check out their Te Kurahina is their sort of name of their school, or wānanga, and I'd certainly encourage people to attend that. If you really want to go into the depths of these, then that would be the place to go.
Kia ora. There's also a comment from Vernon who says it reminds me of a step in narrative counseling where you take a stance on something and calculate what you will need to go to Island 2 and what the factors that might hinder you are.
You were spot on. So it has that, I guess, sort of like a solution-focused, goal-orientated aspect to it. That gives sort of, particularly around change, once you've got sort of an idea, once you've got a hinatori, an aspiration that you're moving towards, to give it some form in the way that those atua did by giving it a voice, by moving towards it, by using the energy of curiosity and determination and focus, starts to expand that hina tori. Kia ora. Deb?
Hi. Kia ora, Tipene. Thanks so much for your sharing of this. I'm thinking as tau iwi that one way that we might also use this is drawing on people's their own whakapapa and their own kind of community networks. And you know, I think about the courage, for example, of my great-grandparents who came from Scotland and England to Aotearoa, and you know, just being able to use that kind of sense of whakapapa to support and promote a similar sort of whakapapa as has been shared here.
Kia ora. And you've just raised a good point. This is both an intra and an interpersonal Purakau. So not only does it sort of give aspects of self, but you can also use, I've used this in organizations for problem solving in organizations. So for people to be able to identify the different aspects, that different roles that people play in organizations. So this Purakau is also an interpersonal, can be used interpersonally as well as sort of intrapersonally.
Yeah,
and
awesome.
Mahi Atua do that actually. When they embed, when they work with the service, they use these Purakau as a way for the service to communicate with each other. Oh wow, it sounds like I've got a bit of whiro happening right now. Maybe I need a bit more of tane or a bit more uiputu, you know. And I've watched this occur. It seems to create a lot of safety. You know, you're not telling someone they're wrong. And that was the cool thing about Māori, is these Purakau, we had no judgment. These atua had purpose and characteristics. And so there was no right or wrong. It was just about purpose and characteristics. And that takes sort of judgment out of it. And I think that was something that really stood out when I did the training with Mahia Atua, was we explored what the characteristics were and what the purpose of each of these atua are. And that's really so helpful in taking judgment out. Like each of these characters has a part to play and is needed and absolutely necessary in that.
Yeah, it's a very powerful way of looking at an issue of a hinatore. And in one of the workshops we host with Tipene, the Pōwhiri Purakau and motivational interviewing, we take quite a bit of time of exploring each of the different atua and what characteristics they have. And it's incredibly powerful. Yeah.
So no mahara, folks, you're welcome to come along. And I just feel really privileged to be able to pass on information that's been very generously shared with me over the years, and realize that this information isn't always common knowledge. And so to be able to, you know, to have this information become more common knowledge, you know, and 5 years ago in health, when I did trainings and we'd start with the PPH, there were very few people who would be able to do that. Now, when I do a training, Māori, non-Māori, it doesn't make any, everyone starts with their PPH, it's just become the norm. And so the idea of Mahia Atua, and I think my vision too, is to have these sorts of ways of working just be the norm, be a natural way of working, along with the pōhiri process, use of karakia, use of mihi to acknowledge people and the mana and the tapu that they come with. They have their own unique influence, and whanaungatanga, you know, the idea of I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and where I'm from that you might connect with, so that you get an idea of the shape of that container you're going to place the trust in, you know, which is different from that sort of the way that I was trained in Western counselling, which said you don't really share much of yourself and it's all about the other person. Where Te Ao Māori, it's the concept of a tuku mai tuku iho, that sort of reciprocity is tuakana teina. Sometimes it's not always in the counselling role. Are you the tuakana? Maybe you have to also be the student at times. And part of one of the principles of Mahia Atua was ka mā te ariki, ka mā te tauira. as we are chiefs, we are students. And if you are open to being the student while in a counselling relationship, it can, and allow them to be the tuakana and to teach you. It's a very powerful experience, and I've had that a few times happen, where I had once a woman came in and she just said, I've got something to teach you and you've got something to teach me. She took me on a visualization, this woman, that connected me to the kaitiaki for my whānau, which is the kōtuku. And I had forgotten that when my grandmother left, it's the only time I've ever seen a kōtuku in my life. It stood on the back of a cow for 3 days. And when my grandmother passed away, on the side of my whakapapa, this kōtuku flew, and my mum knew that it passed, and I had forgotten all about this. And because I was willing to enter into the space of being the student and being the tainer, this woman connected me to something really powerful about my whakapapa. And that's a very non-traditional counselling way of working, but it was beneficial for both of us.
Mm.
It's just an example, folks, but the idea of working and seeing those that you work with, not as clients, but once you've been through a process of whanaungatanga, they're whānau. They're now part of your network. They're part of your experience. And the status changes, they're now known. Tapu tanoa can mean unsafe, unknown, to safe and known, from the darkness to the light. The whole process that we have of the pōwhiri, which is contained in this Purakau, is a change of states, from a state of restriction to a state of freedom, from unknown to known, safe, unsafe to safe. And that's the whole process for Māori anyway, of engagement now, of making sure that on both the celestial, spiritual, and the physical realms, on all those different realms, that there was intention and purpose, and there was safety for those conversations to take place.
Sure. That was a lot of inspirational words of wisdom that we've heard today. I am keeping an eye on the clock. We're almost at 2:30.
Cool.
Does anyone have any pressing questions at this point? Otherwise, perhaps, Tipene, you would like to close us?
Sure. Well, nō reira, kanui te miha ki o koutou pai o koutou aro, o koutou wā, e rua i o koutou hurahi i a tāne, ka hikoi ia ki rangi tūhāhā mauria mai ngā kiti e toru, ki te ko te mātauranga ki roto ki te manaaki ki te Aotearoa. So just a big mihi to you guys for, in a way, being part of this wānanga is the same journey that Tāna had of, sending up to those heavens and bringing back that baskets of knowledge, so that you had the opportunity to manaaki and to take care of this physical realm. And anytime you're in a sort of a wānanga space, you are in the realms of tāne te wānanga, tāne te waiora, tāne mahuta, all the different elements that tāne had, nō reira. So ka nui te mea atu ki o koutou, nō reira māku te karakia, hei whakakapea tō tātou nei wā, pau hihiri, pau rārama, te ahu i roto, mārama i roto, tēnā te pau ko te pau ka eke, nā te pau e nei kōrero, ka mā te ariki, ka mā te tauira, ka puta ki te whai au, ka te ao mārama, hui te ora, hui te mārama, whakamaua kia tīna. Tīna, hui e, tā eke. So such a pleasure, folks. Enjoy your day. I'm going to bed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tipene. And before we close, I'd just like to mention that on the 3rd of November, Tipene is hosting a workshop on the Purakau of Putererangi. So that's a different Purakau, and all the details will be in the email that Fiona will send you with the link to the recording. I do hope that you will review this recording again, because there's so much powerful stuff in here, and I hope it's useful to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Ngā mihi.
you.
Ka kite.